Hello YouTube, my name's Daniel. I'm an Australian who's lived in the United States for roughly 20 years now. I'm an avid consumer of YouTube. I'm just blown away by how much you can learn about anything that you may want to know something about, and the more you get into it, it's amazing how much you learn about things that you didn't even know you had an interest in. So as I said, this is my first go into YouTube, and in the pursuit of something that's a little bit different to what's out there, or to give some insight for others about something that they may have an interest in, I want to talk about returning to Australia at this time, being January 2021, when COVID is in full rage and there are mandatory quarantine requirements on returning to Australia. My journey really starts back in 2019. As it happened, managed to pick up some really good airfares for me and the family to return to Australia in June of 2020. Having been doing this run for 20 years now, these were direct flights, LAX to Melbourne, at a price that I had never had before. So we were pretty chuffed about that. But of course, come the end of February, start of March 2021 was when COVID really got going in the United States. I live in California, and by sort of mid-March, things were in full flight. Society as a whole had to go from 0 to 60 in a bit of a hurry. And of course, when it first started in, early March, I was thinking to myself, yep, no need to go cancelling those flights just yet. That's still 3 months away. Things will change. This will sort itself out. But isn't hindsight everything? Now, sitting in January of 2021, we know that things did not get better. It oscillated, and as we were going through December of 2020, things were really getting rough. But I needed to get back to Australia. When I reflect on the fact that I didn't go in June of 2020, it's, with everything that's transpired, it's with a sincere sense of sadness that I never got home to see the family back then. Entered 2021, the crescendo was sort of building. I needed to get home. So day after day, I got to my birthday, which is in January, early January. A couple of days after that, that urgency that had sort of been building, it got to the point that I just had to go home. I just had to get back. At this time, as you can imagine, there's many different parts to getting back to Australia from the United States. Australia has had a very good record of how it's managed COVID over the last year. They have very few cases after a couple of very dramatic spikes in different communities. They got it underhand and they were pretty eager to keep it that way. So folks that return to Australia at this time have to go through a mandatory 14-day quarantine on arrival. So arrival, how do you get there? Well, I live near Melbourne, which is the biggest close city. My hometown is Geelong. Well, as it turns out, at this point in time, I couldn't get direct flights from LAX to Melbourne. So I had to go via Sydney. No problem. But on arrival, what I'm doing right now as we speak is my 14 days quarantine in Sydney before getting a flight down south. And I want to give you some insight into this, how it works, what they do, and what it's like to be locked up for 14 days. I know there's plenty of people in society that are more isolated than I am, but it's a real strange feeling to literally be locked in a room for 14 days in complete isolation. But as usual, I've jumped ahead. Before we get to the room, first we've got to figure out that flight and the requirements to actually enter Australia at this point in time. First and foremost, they're only allowing citizens, the direct family of citizens, and those who are permanent residents here for work to actually enter the country at this time. Tourists and all the rest of it at this point in things are just not allowed in. And I couldn't imagine why you'd want to put yourself through this. As amazing as Australia is, and I certainly encourage everybody to come at some point in time, now's not the time. You don't want to be sitting in a room for 14 days as part of any vacation, even if they were going to let you. And getting a ticket was no walk in the park either. As I mentioned, there was no direct flights from LAX to Melbourne. You had to go through either Sydney or Auckland. If you want to do the Auckland run, you can actually do your 14 days in Auckland before going to Melbourne. There's a bubble, as they call it, between New Zealand and Australia, and it's pretty much treated as one COVID entity with respect to quarantine and all that. And it's working. Both countries are doing very well to keep it secure. I did mention that the flights that I'd booked back in 2019 to get to Australia in June of 2020 were the best I'd ever had in 20 years of doing the Trans-Pacific run. But of course, with fewer travelers and the great pressures that are on the travel industry, including airlines at this point in time, fares had just gone through the roof by the time I got to the first week of January 2021, and we're trying to get home with a degree of urgency. Just finding a flight was not as easy as you'd think. You go to the kayaks, the Expedias, the Travelocities, and there were some flights. A lot of them wanted to take you on a 33-hour round trip of the world to get there. And the prices were just astronomical. They know that you want to come, so they got you over a barrel. And given that the flights are far from full and far from popular at this point in time, it's no doubt that the prices are going to be high, but just how high they got blew my doors off. But anyhow, my wife and I, my beautiful, lovely wife and I, were looking for flights to get me home. Unfortunately, I couldn't bring the broader family at this time because of work and school commitments, but I just had the need to get back, and my lovely wife gave me all the support that I need to make that actually happen, for which I am truly. So we get to the 9th of January, early afternoon, and I'm looking for flights, pretty much looking all the time, bouncing between work and the need to try and find some way of getting back to Australia. At the same time, learning about the requirements. You have to get a permit, apply for a permit from the federal government to enter Australia. And I wanted to learn what the implications were to get back to the individual states. As I mentioned, I'm in Sydney, which is in New South Wales, but I reside in Geelong, which is, I'm from Geelong, which is in Victoria. And, from what I've learnt, there's been a little bit of state antagonism between these two states, toing and froing, associated with the management of COVID. And at this point in time, in order to travel from New South Wales, when I finish my 14 days mandatory quarantine confinement, I need a Victorian permit as well, which I have applied for. Well, come about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon on January the 9th, I was perusing, Travelocity, Kayak, Expedia, the usuals, and come up with a fare that was significantly less, far less than 50% of what some of the other fares that we'd been looking at were. Initially, I thought, well, it's probably not real, sometimes these things are glitchy. But Yura, my lovely wife, said, find out, try to book it. Let's see if it's true. So we got the credit card out and eventually got to the point that we hit purchase, and it went through. But as you can imagine, with many a bargain, there is always some sort of offset or something that you got to deal with on the side. And in this case, it was the fact that that flight was going to leave in approximately 5 hours from when I purchased it. And of course, you've got to get to the airport a few hours ahead of time. And I just thought, with COVID and all the rest of it, I needed to make sure that margin was ample, which gave me about 3 hours to figure things out at home and confirm with my work that I was actually going. I worded them up that this was likely, but to confirm that that was actually the case, get everything together and get to the airport down at LAX. So I did my best to sort of sort the home front out a bit, but I know I left my lovely wife in the lurch with the kids. I've got 3 kids, all teenagers, all in school. That is school from home in California at this time. And once again, thank you so much, Yura, for making this possible, making this happen. I'm eternally grateful for that. Got the bag packed, ordered the Uber, and got down to LAX. Well, one of the benefits of COVID at this point in time, and I'm sure a lot of SoCal folks would know this, is that the roads are considerably less traveled than they were in the old days. And Friday evening, getting from Pasadena to LAX took 40 minutes. I mean, you never get a better run than that. So in no time at all, I was at the airport, figuring out exactly what I had to do to book. I'd given myself a fairly generous window. So by the time I was sitting at the gate, I had probably about 2.5 hours to kill before the flight, which was great. I was on a United flight, and I will try to put some still photos into this narrative here, but it was amazing. 787, direct from LAX to Sydney, had 12 passengers on it. 12. I think I counted 13 crew when we were departing the plane and 12 passengers. I had a whole section of economy to myself. And as you can imagine, everybody was just folding up all the arms and turning the seats into beds. And you can imagine how good the service was we got during the night, because we all had roughly one person each to look after us. It was weird. It was truly weird. And but it was part of this, 2021 COVID experience. I had a chance to talk to a few of the other folks that were on there. There was 2 people that I heard, was speaking to, that were going back to Australia as permanent residents to work. And there was a couple of other Australians like me trying to get home to see family. And there was 1 or 2 families returning that had been overseas for some time and returning to Australia. Most people going back were individuals like myself, but there was a couple of family groups. The flight was uneventful. It was a little lumpy as flights go, but no problem at all. Good long sleep with the arms up, and can lay down. It was probably the best sleep I've ever had in all the years that I've been traveling between the US and Australia. It was really, really good. And of course, next thing you know, we're arriving in Sydney. And that's where we get to the first part of the whole COVID in Australia, isolation in Australia, quarantine in Australia thing, which is kind of the core of what I want to share with you while I go through it. First and foremost, the thing that you notice is you've got the airport to yourself. Obviously, I was coming in through the international area where you've got to go through customs and immigration and the like. But that plane with its 12 people were the only 12 people that I saw arriving in the whole time that I was in the Sydney airport. We got marched from the plane by all these folks that were fully wrapped up in their their masks, their Tyvek suits, their face shields and gloves, the whole works. And, they were making sure that we stayed 6 feet apart while we were walking through. We had to go to a health screening center, as you would imagine, which makes perfect sense. And, once again, for the 12 flight folks, there was, I think, about 8 nurses that were doing the health screening as we entered into the customs hall. Went through that, no problem. I think everybody was healthy. You wouldn't deliberately put yourself through this if you didn't leave in good health, or else you were just going to get yourself in trouble when you got here, or just complicate things more so than in trouble. Then we walked down towards the baggage claim, because you had to get your bags first. And once again, they just made sure that we were 6 feet apart as we were doing this. And there was Border Patrol folks all over the place. I think that's what they call them over here, Australian Border Patrol. They take you up to immigration, and in no time at all, you're getting through immigration. So you're through immigration and you're heading for the door. Border Patrol's still in control here. But what I found really interesting and quite fascinating, actually, is once you leave the confinement of the airport to go to the hotel, your custody, for want of a better word, was transferred from the Border Patrol to the ADF, Australian Defence Forces. So you take that mighty step outside those sliding glass doors of the airport, Border Patrol stays inside, and a combination of Army, Navy and Air Force personnel, and you could just tell by their uniforms, sort of corral you. They actually take your luggage, nice of them, over to the bus, put you on the bus, make sure everybody actually gets on the bus, nobody disappears through the cracks, and then the bus takes off for whereabouts unknown. No idea where I'm going at this point. I've got another couple of still photos that I can show just of the soldiers actually transferring us. They weren't all that eager about cameras at this point in time, but I got a couple of photos just to be indicative of what was going on. And as I mentioned, didn't know where I was going. I know Sydney superficially, but not all that well. But I can read signs, so I soon figured out we were heading to the inner city, which was intriguing. I knew I was going to be doing 14 days isolation, and I somewhat expected to be in a roadside motel or something like that. I knew we were going to be quite seriously controlled, but didn't really know where it was going to wind up being. As it turned out, the bus pulled up out the front of the Marriott in Sydney Harbour. At this point, the ADF, soldiers, sailors, airmen, once again, sort of kept control of our movements. You know, nothing heavy-handed about it. They were super nice people. I spoke to a couple of them, and it was great to hear where they were from and what part of Australia their families originated in. But they were making sure that we went inside. And as you can see in the background, talk about a score. I wound up in the Marriott near Circular Quay. That water that you can see just in the middle of the screen here with the wonderful, wonderful, wonderful Sydney Harbour Bridge behind it is the westernmost section of Circular Quay. And I'm watching the ferries come in, day out. And that element of it is really, really good. So get out of the bus, the ADF, take our luggage, escort us inside. Similar to what happened with the airport, once we actually got inside, we sort of transitioned to New South Wales State Police. And they're the ones that are sort of overseeing our check-in here and getting all our contact information to make sure that they know who we are, where we're going, where we came from, and all the rest of it. But as they told us, there's soldiers and police overseeing this building at all times. They've taken over the entire Marriott in Sydney Harbour as a quarantine station. And I am currently on the 30th floor. So there we have it. That's pretty much the process from getting, knowing that I needed to get home, wanted to get home, the airfares, the flights, the first arrival, and transition to where the quarantine was going to be spent, which is a lovely spot. You saw the view. Very fortunate to be here. And, kind of thinking to myself, I'd much rather be here than near Tullamarine down in Melbourne. I mean, it's 30 miles from the city. I can only imagine the view if I was stuck out at Tulla. But anyhow, I'm going to stop right now. I've been here for a few days now, so I've got some content to share about how it all works and, what a day in the life of quarantine in Australia is like, doing your 14 days detention. But I'll get what I've done so far up and just see if this works for me. Once again, my first foray into YouTube. And then I'll post some further content just to show you what it's like to be here and go through this. All the best. Talk to you later.